Hi, class. Welcome back. Today we're finishing up our Chapter 10 discussion of geomorphic processes and landforms involving fluvial or running water processes. So let's move forward. So in the fluvial process, we'll be looking at the actions of water as both an agent of erosion and as deposition. We need to understand those processes first. So let's dive into that. There are two major ways that water will run across the surface of the earth. One is in sheets. It's very rare, but if you ever looked at a impermeable street or road during a rainstorm, you might see these sheets of water, one on top of the other, moving downhill. That's not the way that most water flows across the surface of the earth. Water typically will find the lowest place available. It will accumulate and move downhill from there. So for our urban areas, that's usually like the gutter or curb where the water will accumulate, build up, and then move very quickly downhill. Well, in nature, we see that in rivulets and little streams and gullies, but ultimately in those will all channel towards rivers. So through both overland flow and stream flow, we end up with water flowing downhill through a low spot, and that is typically a stream or a river, such as this one. So a nice efficient way of getting water to flow downhill. Remember, the deeper the water, the faster it will go. So rivers, if they need to evacuate water out of an area very quickly, they'll do so very efficiently by increasing the depth of the water. So some basic rules here. Water carries sediment along with it. The faster the water moves, the more sediment it can carry, and also the larger sediment it can carry. That makes sense, right? So a raging river can carry some pretty large boulders and gravel along its base, and a very slow moving water flow in a stream would be hardly able to carry any large or sizable sediment along with it. So faster stream velocities are also going to have the ability to erode material and deepen the channel itself. So the erosional component there will allow fast moving water to dig a deeper channel. When stream velocity slows, by the way, let's say when a river hits a lake, it's going to dump its sediment load. Or when a river empties into the ocean, it will dump its sediment load. So once that velocity reduces significantly, the ability for that water, that moving water, to carry its load gets diminished to the point it has to drop that sediment load. And the first sediment that gets dropped from a flowing river slowing down would be the coarse material, and the finer material can get carried further and further and further. For this reason, we see coarse materials being deposited near a coastline as a river enters into the coastline, but the silt and clay, the really fine stuff, can be carried out into the deep ocean before it's actually deposited. Now, in a stream, we see material being carried in several different ways. First of all, dissolved. So we have some mineral matter dissolved to the ion level. So we have dissolved ions in the water, giving the water a mineral characteristic, but these are the finest parts that are being carried along by the water itself. We also see that certain very fine mineral fragments are suspended within the water itself. They're being carried along within the water column. So that's a suspended load. Clays, silts, things of that nature. And then we have the bed load. So dissolved load, suspended load, the bed load. And along the bed load is where we're going to get the coarser material. And they can be bouncing along through a process of saltation. We've seen that process before when we were talking about aeolian processes. But we could get mineral fragments bouncing along the base of the bed as part of the bed load. But also we see larger rock fragments being dragged along in a process called traction. So bed load includes saltation and traction, and we see suspended load, the finer materials being carried downstream, and the dissolved load, basically the ions being carried downstream too. Now we'll find that in fluvial processes, towards the headlands or the headwaters, we will have very steep slopes. So think about in mountainous areas, we're going to get steep gradients to the channels of rivers. And as those rivers get closer and closer towards their ultimate destination, many times that would be the ocean or the sea, we have very level characteristics, no steepness to these at all. And finally, at the mouth of a river, we'll see the sediment load being dumped. And that's also going to be in a very flat environment. Let's take a look at what I mean there. So we see in the headwaters in this case here, very steep gradients, very sharp V-shaped characteristics to canyons being cut by rivers that are incising down, a lot of energy, a lot of velocity to the water. Again, that has the ability to dig deeper or gouge into the channel a little bit more and be more effective in its erosional capabilities. So nice V-shaped canyon being formed right there. Now, as we get down towards the floodplains, we have very little gradient, and so the water has lost some velocity. It's still carrying some suspended load and some bed load, but we see a wide floodplain being developed. And in that floodplain, the river channel itself can migrate back and forth by eroding certain banks and depositing in other banks. And so they, over time, the stream channel could actually change its location as it's making its way towards its river mouth or delta. Now, one thing to note, in the middle of the water channel, because water will flow fastest away from the banks and with deeper water, there's always an area of fastest flow. We call that the thalweg. And if you were to do rafting down a river, you want to follow that thalweg as much as you can. It will not only get you down the river faster, but keep you away from some of the slower moving waters on the sides. Now the thalweg, of course, is going to have its own course within the watercourse. It's where that deepest water will be found. But as we see the water moving in a downward direction, it is not taking a straight line course, is it? It's actually meandering back and forth. So in lowland floodplains, we see meandering of water patterns or river patterns, and that's going to mean that in some areas we get deposition occurring, and in other areas we get erosion of the banks. Well, if that progresses over time, eroding into the banks is going to move that water channel. And we can see that that can have consequences of deposition, erosion, deposition, erosion. Well, what would happen if we had erosion on this portion of the riverbank and this portion of the riverbank? Over time, these two are going to erode so much they would actually join up, and there'd be no need for this wide meander to exist anymore. In fact, the river would just take a new channel. So we see quite often that rivers have changed their location in their lower reaches. In fact, this crescent-shaped feature here, this Oxbow Lake, was probably, or in fact it was definitely, a meander of a prior location of this river's channel. So we can see here, we've got a river meandering along, depositing in certain areas and eroding in others. And that is going to allow this to change its location over time. Can we see here that an Oxbow Lake has been created because the river basically changed its channel over here from A to B. And we can see that that Oxbow Lake becomes an Oxbow Swamp and then will slowly just become a scar. But over time, that might once again see water cutting through as the river changes its location. Now, if we have meandering rivers in an area that gets uplifted, geologically uplifted, now the meanders may actually be entrenched. They can't get out of there anymore as the river cuts down into the uplifted rock or sediment, and it's basically trapped in its meandering location. And that's happened in the southwest states, out by Utah, Arizona, Colorado. And we can see in the Canyonlands area where we see these entrenched meanders because this whole area has been regionally uplifted through tectonic processes. It makes for a beautiful landscape, but it always requires a regional tectonic uplift for that to happen. Now, as we get to the furthest downhill reaches of a river, the river has to empty into some body of water, a low spot, and the lowest of the low spots that we see typically is going to be the ocean or the sea. And at that point, as a meandering river empties through the lowlands, reaches the ocean or the sea at the mouth of the river, it's going to dump its suspended and bedload rock fragments. And those are going to build up. So as the river continuously empties out silt and sand and clay, we're going to see that those build up over time to create what's called a delta or a river delta. So if we look at this diagram in the lower left here, the river would have once emptied out to a coastline that existed probably someplace back here on the diagram. And over time, that delta has built up, and now the river has to cut through the delta. It usually does so in multiple channels, and in doing so, we sometimes refer to these as bird's foot deltas because it looks like a bird's foot in our view from space here of the various river channels that will exist, emptying the water from the river and finally meeting the ocean. The whole time dumping its sediment load to create or build up this delta. That's a very quick review of fluvial processes. This is a Geography 101 course. It's not a course in geomorphology or in fluvial processes. There's actually a course called Fluvial Geomorphology. Goes into great detail about how rivers work. But for your first glimpse into this, that covers what you need to know for your exam. Okay? Good luck. Take care, and let me know if you have any questions at all. Thanks. Bye-bye.